memory, and I just using AI to find these photos. This is a bus in 1980 from Seoul to Cheonan. It was the first time I went to Cheonan, which was my father's hometown. While I was on the bus, right, as soon as I arrived in Cheonan, I actually remember looking out the window and seeing the countryside. I remember seeing the dirt. I remember seeing the little hut-like houses. And this was not the hut that I actually saw. I don't have any photos back then. Again, I looked up on the internet, show me a house in Cheonan in 1980. And it did look somewhat similar to this. I remember seeing the hut for the first time. It was very different to all the houses that I had been experiencing in New Jersey, where I grew up. And so the other thing is, as soon as I arrived, right, I was able to meet some relatives there. And again, I was like 7 years old. I met some relatives, and it was the first time that I ever heard somebody call my father by his name. Samshiga. It was the first time. Right? So I remember these memories vividly, right? And I kept them with me. And actually, these memories led to something more. And this is what I want to talk about today. These were all small memories in my mind that have stayed with me since I was 7 years old. And actually, I didn't go back to Cheonan until I was an adult. When I went back, of course, the dirt road, the buses, the huts, all very different now in Cheonan. But I have these in my memories, and these are what I call glimpses. Just to define glimpse formally, I use this word not only because it's an appropriate word, but it's a beautiful word, right? The noun is a fleeting view or look. Fleeting, I have in yellow to emphasize. It's just a peek. If I was talking about meeting a person, I love this word too, it's an encounter, right? You meet someone at the bus stop. You meet someone you sit next to on the plane ride. It's just an encounter. But some of these encounters and glimpses stay with you. And the verb form is the same, to get a brief look at, to see momentarily or incompletely. And that's really the key. It's incomplete. The whole story is not there. But I'm going to say, right, this was the title of the talk, I'm going to give you just a glimpse of the things I've been thinking about, not only preparing this talk, but I've also been working on a book, which is also called Glimpse. And I have in parentheses this word of genius. The reason I talk about the word genius is because in the past, I've been sort of known as the person who has always said, you know, there's no such thing as genius, right? And in fact, not only is there no such thing, there's no use for it, right? If I say, oh, that person's a genius, what's the benefit? What's the use? Who cares? And is it even true, right? But I've said there is no such thing as genius, and if you think about the definition of genius, it's an exceptional intellectual or creative power or other natural ability, meaning we're born this way. We're born with this. And that's what the definition of genius has been. But the thesis today and what I've been thinking about is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to change my stance. I'm going to admit, yes, there is such a thing as genius, and we all possess it because it's natural, but that natural ability is not something we can perform or we can sort of showcase in any type of performance. Instead, it's a natural ability that comes from a glimpse. Going back to the glimpses that I have in my mind of Cheonan in 1980, each of these glimpses did something different. It wasn't the glimpse, but it allowed me, in that moment actually, to imagine my entire father's childhood. I didn't care if it was true or not. Reality or not, I imagined, oh, this is what my father's childhood was. At the same time, I became very curious and created a life for myself in Cheonan if I had lived there, right? This is really the genius, that glimpses lead to curiosity, imagination, and creativity. Today's talk, I'm not going to really talk about these three mechanisms differently. I'm just going to sort of put them together as a similar type of finding. And what I'm going to show, this is sort of the conclusion first in a brief way, that the genius pathway is that a glimpse can lead us to this natural ability that we all have to imagine, create, and to be curious. But it's not that I have a reality or a truth that I can show you, but it's that these curiosities, imaginations, and creativities can lead to more glimpses, right? It's more seeking of information. And as you can see, these glimpses were so strong, and I was such a genius that it led to so many glimpses, not only for myself, but for my kids. I wanted to make sure that I could know as much as I could, not only of Cheonan, but of every other city I could get to in Korea, to understand the culture. And of course, as you get older, it's difficult to do it for yourself only, but for my kids, I'm always excited when I am able to show them a glimpse of something that's foreign, something that's different, because of course my kids also, Korean American, grow up here. So I showed them many glimpses. And that's what I really want to talk about today, this genius ability that we have to take a glimpse and run with it. So how do we measure a glimpse? I'm a cognitive psychologist, so what I'm going to do is go through a few different experiments that I've thought about that are related to glimpses and how genius we are at taking them and doing something with it, but also when it breaks down. Okay, so here's just a little demonstration that you can do. I hope you can see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flash for you a variety of items in 3 rows, top, middle, bottom. Your task is to encode all of the items. Immediately afterwards, I'm going to present a star. The star will be positioned at the top, middle, or bottom of the slide. The location of the star will indicate which row of items you will need to remember and say out loud. Everybody understand? You have to look very carefully because it's just going to be a flash, and then you have to repeat what those items are in the row that has the star located on it. Okay, ready? Okay? What were they? B, C, B, 9. Okay, let's try one more trial. Ready? G, D, 8, B. So what we're seeing, some of you are too far away, and of course this is not an exact experiment. I would have to do the flash in the right way. But what we're seeing is we do have retrievals. And this was a classic experiment to look at our capacity for a glimpse. They didn't call it a glimpse, it's called sensory memory. And what was found, this is a really creative experiment because what was found was that if I gave you an entire array like this, if I gave you an entire array like this and said, remember all of these items, all 12, you would say G5, you wouldn't be able to remember anymore because there's output interference. So this is known as the partial report procedure, where if I just take a star, right, regardless over trials where the location is, people are able to get the entire row. So that means your capacity is very big, right? It's bigger than the partial report. As long as the star is presented immediately, if there's a delay, it goes away. But as long as it's presented immediately, we're able to remember the items in the particular row aligned with the star. This means that within a flash of taking in visual information, we can see and remember more than the partial report. And this was at the beginning of the cognitive revolution, beginning of when we had computers, okay? So the short story is that we get a lot in a glimpse. And the question is, are you gonna retain it? Okay, so what we saw here is many of you were correct, and what I gave you was actually a pretty perfect glimpse. One question that I wanted to make sure to go through, especially as a parent, and especially as a parent who talks with a lot of other parents who are worried about their English, and they ask me often, my English is imperfect. Should I still speak to my child in English, right, since they were a baby? And this is a question I often get, and I see a lot of parents avoiding speaking in English because their English is broken. And this is a really difficult question to test in psychology. So for example, you might look at my parents, and they've lived here in America, but they immigrated here, so their English is not perfect, right? But you see me as the child, and my English became fluent. So you could conclude, oh, it doesn't matter if the parent's English is not perfect, the kid learns English. But that's not the case, right? There are confounding factors because I go to school, I meet others, I watch TV, and so on. So that is not a perfect experiment. But there was a perfect experiment, which was the case of Simon, which was a deaf child. Simon was born deaf to hearing parents, and that means the parents did not know sign language at the time. And of course, they had to learn it desperately, very quickly, right, as adults. So after the baby was born, they sort of took a crash course in American Sign Language. So obviously their sign language was very disfluent, right? It was broken. So what could they do? In their town, there were no ASL schools. There were no other deaf students. There were nobody around who knew American Sign Language fluently. So that's why this is a perfect experiment. So them as parents were signing in a broken way to their child. What happened with the child? Fascinating, and here's genius. Singleton and Newport titled their talk, When Learners Surpass Their Models, the Acquisition of American Sign Language from Inconsistent Input. So this case, Simon, as the deaf child, made perfect American Sign Language simply from the broken signs that he got from their parents. So even with inconsistent input, and I call this an imperfect glimpse, Simon was able to develop a more fluent ASL system. Basically, he was able to create. He was able to imagine more given those core glimpses of ASL. So this is a really important point. He took the core glimpses of the language and ignored errors. Ignored the errors of his parents. How did he know what were the errors, right? So this is really some sort of genius where you can imagine a better system just with broken input. So that actually doesn't go against this idea of a perfect glimpse. A perfect glimpse actually is an imperfect, incomplete one. And that's really important. Too much these days, and actually when I think about AI and Samsung, we want perfection. We want perfect glimpses. We want people to do it for us. And this might become a problem. So in Simon's case, we get a lot in a glimpse, right? But we seemingly ignore the imperfections. What happens if we're unable to ignore these imperfections? So another way to ask this question is, what if we thought the glimpse was too short? What if we thought the glimpse was insufficient, right? If we expected more of a story, more of a perfect explanation or an answer. What I propose is that the consequence might be that we will not choose to invest in curiosity, imagination, or creativity. And this is really the killing off of humanity. This is when we can't create anymore, when we can't imagine anymore, this might become a problem. So So I want to talk about an insufficient glimpse, but again, an insufficient glimpse here is based on what the glimpser thinks, right? We can't define what an incomplete or insufficient glimpse is. It depends on how the glimpser takes it. So if there's an insufficient glimpse and you think, oh, it's not enough, I don't want it, it's too hard for me. This is when we have the danger of, especially kids saying, I can't do it. I don't want to do it, right? So I want to go back, and this was an early experiment I did many years ago, and because I thought about it again, thinking about a glimpse. And it was with elementary school students in New York City. And what we did was we provided for them texts like these, right? Would it be fun to be a fish, right? And these were 3rd to 5th graders, and they were, the texts that we gave them were appropriate for their age, meaning it was very clear to understand, okay? So some of the texts they got were in this format. Other texts in a different condition were similarly very easy to understand text for their age, but had a little more effort involved because the font was a little bit weird and the color was also similar to the background. So they had to sort of squint, and it took them a little bit longer to get through the text. But again, it's still legible. They could still do it. And I call this a sufficient versus an insufficient glimpse. But in a sense, they're both glimpses. They're both perfect glimpses because you could still read them, right? So after they did these different trials, after they read each text, they were asked for a judgment of comprehension. How confident, how do you feel that you understood the text? And this was on a scale from 1 to 6. And kids this age, they're very good at understanding how to use a scale and how to understand what they understand. Okay? So after we asked them for the judgment of comprehension, we gave them a multiple choice test. And so here, going back to this sort of idea of genius, we can be interested, how did they do on the test? But it's actually not that interesting. That's not what genius is. And besides, they did 100% almost. It didn't matter what the text font was. So they were all very, very smart, and they all got it, and they could all do the task. But before we ended the experiment, at the very end, we gave them a theories of intelligence scale for kids. And this was typically the one that was developed by Carol Dweck, looking at, some of you might know it as fixed versus growth mindset, but originally they were called entity versus incremental theorists. Right? Entity theorists are those who believe that intelligence is fixed, meaning we're born that way. Incremental theorists are those who believe that intelligence can be developed, right? We're not born that way. It's not really about genius. Okay, so that's what we did, and the first sad thing is that we get a lot of entity theorists. We get a lot of entity and incremental. At that young of age, people think already that their intelligence can't be developed. So remember, performance, there was no difference. But now what I'm really interested is, what happens to their judgments of comprehension? Do they still think they learned a lot and understood the text? They should, because they did fine on the multiple choice test. So the only interesting manipulation here is, if they feel like they didn't comprehend it, that's the I can't do it, right? The glimpse was not good enough. And here's what we got. So we have basically sufficient and insufficient were the two types of conditions. We have the judgment of comprehension on the y-axis, and we have the incremental theorist, which is the gray bar that you see going straight across. Those kids who believe that intelligence can be developed were basically correct in understanding that they comprehended it. It didn't matter what the glimpse font was, right? But this is really the devastating picture here, because this is very strong data. You never get this kind of strong data in cognitive psychology. what you saw was that entity-focused kids, if the glimpse were clear and easy, sort of given to you, right, you said, yeah, I comprehended it all. It's very high. But if they got the insufficient glimpse where it was a little bit effortful to read, that it really just plummeted all the way down. Basically, I think it's similar to saying, I can't do it. So some people have said to me, well, if there's no performance difference, who cares? As long as they do well on performance. Of course we have to care. If a child who's an entity theorist is studying at home alone and they open their textbook and they think, oh, the font's too much, there's not enough pictures, they're not going to want to read. They're already going to think, oh, I don't want to study because I'm not going to be able to do well anyway. So it's really important to think about what are the things that affect how we're going to take a glimpse and run with it, or whether we're going to give up. So basically it's the entity theorists, even the incremental theorists took this very difficult font and said, no, I got it. I can do something with this. Okay, but it's really that's what intelligence is, and that's really the incremental theorists who thought in that way. Okay, so a glimpse, I want to say, is not ours to receive, period. It's not just something we take and say, okay, I know the answer, thank you. It's very different from that. It's something that's much more active, right? And that's where we get into Curious George. Of course, we love Curious George. Of the series, this was my favorite Curious George book, and it's when he finds these puzzle pieces. It's just a glimpse. It's novel. He doesn't know what the puzzles are, okay? But he's curious. He's curious, and he's going to go for it. He's going to go for it. He's not going to say, oh, this is too complex for me to understand. He's going to go for it. So what does he do? He eats a puzzle piece because it looks like candy. And so this was the Curious George Goes to the Hospital series. And it's really just adorable, but it's adorable because we see the actual curiosity that came from just a glimpse, right? It's a completely novel thing. So it's not ours to receive. It's an active type of genius where you take it and you do some kind of behavior. In this case, right, it's a little dangerous, but he survived, and curiosity has been defined as a need to know when there is uncertainty. But I'm going to tweak this definition a little bit soon. Okay, so the main thing is that glimpses don't inspire one answer. They inspire more glimpses. Just like I did with my glimpses of Korea, ongoing for my whole life, right? And this is what I call a metacognitive glimpse. Metacognition is something that I study, and I'm not talking about it a lot today, but it's very related to what this metacognitive cycle of a glimpse is. Metacognition in general says that we have an opinion. I can say, yeah, this was pretty easy, or I understood this, or I know that this is candy, or I think this is candy. But it also gives us the ability to say, I might be wrong. I don't know what this is. I need to do more experimentation. I need to be active, right? And that's the imagination, creativity, and curiosity. And it also allows us to then say, I need to seek more. That's the curiosity part, right? I need to seek more, but seeking more doesn't stop and give you an answer. That's when you get feedback. The feedback isn't, here's the answer, this is what it is, it's a puzzle. No, it basically just allows you to adjust your opinion, right? There's always a constant reuptake of feedback, and you have to change your opinion. And this is a constant cycle. This is where we get the metacognitive glimpse that leads to other glimpses, and a change, a constant change of your development in knowing, okay? So I'm going to change the definition of curiosity, not merely a need to know, but a need to know more. It's a constant need to know more. In other words, you don't necessarily need a final answer. And that's really true curiosity. There have been two different types of curiosity investigated in psychology. One of them is known as explorative curiosity, which is like this cycle, the metacognitive curiosity. The other is called exploitative curiosity. And people talk about it as a why versus what. If you have a little kid asking, why is the sky blue? That's explorative curiosity. If you have a kid answering, what color is the sky? You say blue. Yeah, it's done. That's sort of exploitative. It's really interesting when I have parents come up to me and say, they really boast, you know, my kid is so curious. I asked them to think about what kind of curiosity is it, right? And I also asked them to think, how do you answer your kid's questions, right? If it's a one-word answer like this is the answer, that's not the true curiosity that you want. And what they say is that explorative curiosity leads to more uncertainty, but exploitative leads to certainty. And that's not the type of metacognitive curiosity that you want. Okay, it's been found in the literature that in fact exploitative curiosity is much more common in adults because we're busy, and low socioeconomic status individuals. And we can imagine it's a lot of work to keep using exploration, right? So you can imagine, and I did this, if we have a current state and we want to get to a goal state, I did this very slowly to make you annoyed, right? This could be a way, one path of explorative curiosity. Before you get to an answer or an opinion, it takes you a long time with a lot of detours. Another way that it could be is that you never get to a full answer, and instead you very slowly think of several different types of paths or potential answers, right? And again, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. Here's another consideration for exploration. You could get to an answer and say, this is how I'm going to produce it. But then you can say, well, let me go back to the beginning and start over. How often do we do that? There are a lot of cases where we reject this. We just want to get to an answer and memorize it. Okay, and this is where we're getting into the exploitative curiosity. So what happens if you reject a glimpse? And I wanted to go through this experiment, which I really like. But before I do that, I want to talk about just the definitions of metacognition. There are two types of processes in metacognition. Monitoring is when we say, in my opinion, this is true, but I might be wrong. Control is when we say, let's seek more so I can get feedback. So those are the two different types which equal metacognition. It's the control process, the let's seek more because I want to get feedback, that's often missing. Right? We can very easily say, oh yeah, I'm not really sure about that, but do we seek information or not? Are we curious for information or not? Okay? And this is actually, I think, a really interesting question with the future of AI, especially with trust. You know, we have a lot of AI doctors, right? But the question is, does the patient trust the AI doctor? And that research is now just beginning. Okay, so it's the let's seek more, that's the question. So in this experiment, which was done just before COVID, these were also Barnard and Columbia students, we gave students different statements like this. They say smoking causes lung cancer. They say hard work pays off. They say children of rich parents are spoiled. And for every single statement, we asked people to give on a scale a rating from non-factness to fact. So they say children of rich parents are spoiled. How much of a fact is it? And then we asked them on a completely different session, how much of an opinion is it? So we should all expect that if something is a fact, it cannot be an opinion, right? That should be negatively correlated. which we should expect and which we got. We also asked in a different session about agreement. So if I asked you, they say children of rich parents are spoiled. How much do you agree? 1 to 7. Disagree to agree. This is what we found, okay? And we tested actually both students here in America, in New York, and students this was actually in Aju University in Korea. Everything was translated into Korean. Okay, so here's what we found, and you don't have to go through all of this. What we want to say, there was a bunch of different statements, and of course you might be able to tell here that fact and opinion were negatively correlated. But what you might also be able to see is that fact correlated with agreement. That's very dangerous, right? You can see it here. Agreement, just because you agree with something, it doesn't mean it's a fact. And that's when we start refusing to have discussions, okay? So in this case, you might think, oh yeah, I agree that children of rich parents are spoiled. Are you going to want to reach out to the kids? No. It's going to stop all your curiosity, okay? So basically, we're going to stop about seeking more information. Okay, I'm going to now go through my final experiment. That was mild. It's okay if we say The Godfather is the best movie in the world. It's a fact. Nothing's dangerous about it. But let's get into a more potentially dangerous situation of a glimpse. Imagine waking up one morning with a little scratch in your throat. You worry that you're coming down with something, but hope it's just from a lack of sufficient sleep. Over the next hour, you develop a cough, and for a moment you think, maybe I should call a doctor. But the moment passes and you assume, as you've heard, that a cold is going around, that you've just come down with a simple cold. So here, you can actually diagnose yourself, or you can seek more information. And this is sort of the inspiration for this experiment that, in fact, just was published this morning. So, we gave subjects, and this is also Barnard Columbia College students, we gave subjects a series of symptoms like a fever, headache, chills, vomiting, muscle pain. What is the diagnosis? Okay, you might say, oh, it's the flu, it's B, influenza. We asked then, how confident are you in your diagnosis? And then we asked in a separate experiment, do you want to get more information? Meaning, do you want to see more symptoms? Because you might want to change your answer. And in fact, if they say, yeah, I want more information, then we might say, okay, you also have an infection inside the mouth and the toothache. So you might change your answer. That's what metacognition is, the constant cycle of a glimpse, or pain between the ears and neck. And you could go up to 3 series of symptoms. Okay, here's another one. Okay, how confident are you? Get more information, you can get more information. Okay, we also, before the experiment, right, had different conditions. We had a control group who just did the regular experiment so we could see the confidence level and the information seeking. But we also had 2 expertise levels, a short condition and a long condition. In the short condition, people were given a series of illnesses and their symptoms for 5 minutes before the experiment. In the other condition, the long condition, it was throughout the experiment. So we think of the long condition as the truer experts, and the short condition as the people just looking up stuff on the internet, okay? And so if we look at how confident are you, we do see that the short condition, the illusion of knowing, had the highest confidence. And that's pretty dangerous. We also found, for the get more information, that the short condition is less likely to get more information at both decision stage 1 and decision stage 2. And this is basically so it's really the illusion of expertise in this paper. Okay, so the AI effects, I just want to say one thing about AI before I finish. One of the AI effects, it's basically given to you. It's given to you. You don't really have to rely on imagination, creativity, right, or curiosity. And if you want to get to this, the metacognitive glimpse is actually easiest with people. When you get into discussions with people, that's when you're getting into this metacognitive glimpse cycle of curiosity, right? So it can be achieved socially, right? The question is, how efficient do we want to be? So we have to get that balance, right? So the genius glimpse that I talked about before, this is my final points, getting to this curiosity, imagination, creativity. My first point is that we all have genius. My second point is that genius comes from this glimpse. My third point is that the wrong glimpse, or what we feel about a glimpse, can lead to ungenius, where we don't want to do anything actively anymore. And the fourth point is that metacognitive glimpses are the ones that give rise to further glimpses repeatedly. Thanks.